Hello, welcome everyone. Welcome to Talkworks. This is the first talk of the day. Today is day 4. So a little bit, I will do just an introduction about Talkworks. Talkworks is an annual international conference led by Ladies That UX. Ladies That UX is a global organization that has created an inspiring and inspirational global community for women who work with design and technology, leading a global movement present in more than 75 cities around the world. All TalkWex presentations are being recorded on our YouTube channel, so you can watch and rewatch our videos and share with other people as well. My name is Mariana. I'm a service interaction designer, also EMEA director at Ladies That UX, and one of the chapter leads of Ladies That UX Milan. For accessibility purposes, I'm going to describe myself. I'm an Asian woman with short black hair, black eyes, with some two piercings on my nose. I'm using a brown dress with black stripes, and I'm speaking from Milan, Italy, from my living room using a filters here on the back to cover my living room. So our guest today is Veena Sonwalkar. She currently leads multidisciplinary teams at Frog Design, and she's one of the chapter leads of Ladies That UX in Bangalore, India. She's going to talk about how it is to design for the next billion, where she will explain more about this scenario in India for those who are not familiar with. So welcome, Veena.
Thanks,
Hello.
Mariana. Hello. Thank you, Mariana, for inviting me for Talk UX. And hello, everyone. It's great to meet all of you.
Veena's talk is very interesting, and I really enjoyed because we had the opportunity of doing an event together a few months ago. So would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. I'm Veena Sonwalkar, and currently I'm in my room, in a yellow room, wearing a yellow dress. I'm based out of Bangalore, India. So I'm an Indian woman, and I'm wearing glasses. For those of you, who would like to know how I look. And maybe I could start the talk. I could share my
Yes,
screen and I could start my presentation. Okay.
I will leave the
Thank
stage
you.
for you, Veena. See you
All
after.
right.
Bye bye.
Thanks, Mariana. Thank you so much for the introduction. And again, once again, good evening, all, or good morning to the ones in the other time zone. And I hope everybody is safe and sound in this crazy year. So today I would be talking about designing for the next billion users. And I will be primarily focusing my talk on who are the next billion users, as well as why are they important. And once again, I would like to thank Talk UX for inviting me over and to help me connect with the design community across various countries. And let me again start with a brief intro about myself. I'm a creative lead at Frog Design. I have about 16 years of experience. I started my career as a graphic designer, designing online games for kids, and I slowly transitioned to be a UX designer. And prior to Frog, I also worked with various firms. At Frog, I currently lead multidisciplinary teams. I'm based out of Bangalore, India. So I work in the Frog Bangalore studio. And for the folks who are not very familiar with Frog, we are a global design and digital agency. And the firm has been around for over 50 years. Our founders started this firm with the belief that form follows emotion, and we pretty much follow that in everything we do. So, with that, let me get started with my talk. First of all, let's try to understand who are the next billion users. And why are they so important? Most of the next billion users live in 10 big emerging economies. They primarily live in countries like India, Brazil, South Africa, or Peru, uh, as well as many other emerging economies. But primarily, they live in these 10 big emerging economies. They do not really belong to any particular age group as such, but this term, next billion users, has been used primarily for users who are using internet for the very first time, and mostly in the last few years, or rather to be precise, mostly in the last 10 years. And there is no age group as such. This, they're pretty diverse. The next billion users are pretty diverse. So, for example, if you take Asia, a country like Japan, the average age of the users could be 45 years, but in the Philippines it is 25. And since I live in India, most of my talk would be kind of focused around India, but primarily, because they are so spread across so many geographies, there is no particular age group as such. And with smartphones kind of becoming more accessible to a larger population day by day, also complemented by cheaper data plans, internet has become more accessible. So this is kind of in contrast to the developed countries, where the first billion users were located. And the first billion users, they primarily used internet for the very first time on a PC or a laptop. But unlike the first billion users, most of the next billion users live in they're substantially low income compared to the first billion users. And pretty much they are like half the population of the world. They are somewhere between 3.8 to 4 billion users. And as you can see in this chart, and once again, since I live in India, most of my talk would be based on India. So as you can see in this chart, there has been a significant growth of internet users in India. Um, so if you look at in 2010, there were about 100 million users, and that's kind of grown to over half a billion users, last year. So this kind of translates into the volume of transactions in terms of e-commerce or basically any other online services. And this year with the COVID-19, this whole digital transformation is kind of it's augmented this trend even more. And if you look at the entire emerging economies, it's almost like one third of the world's population. So there are about 2.1 billion internet users, and most of them use not just for information, but they also use internet for entertainment, for communication, or many other forms of transactions. And again, their primary medium to be online is through the mobile phone. And to just give you a brief of what this means in terms of the usage of any apps or any certain, or any certain product, uh, last year there were about 20 billion messages which were sent on the New Year's, and that was just from India. And so you can imagine the scale of usage of WhatsApp, right? If you combine all the countries. Um, and most of these users are using internet for the very first time. So they are using not just for information, but also kind of entertainment, and also primarily to keep in touch, primarily as a medium for communication. And that's where you see, especially in Asia, a lot of apps like TikTok or WhatsApp, which are hugely popular because they are a means of keeping in touch, for communication or for entertainment. But however, many still kind of struggle to access information, or they're not very internet savvy because they are using internet for the very first time. And they also kind of rely on the community to kind of share or help them use the internet. And many Indians are also connecting remotely for the very first time during the pandemic. Be it like online learning or online banking, Indians are kind of adapting, or sometimes even forced to adapt to this new normal. So this image on the right, you can see this teacher who is trying to take her online class, and in India there's a term called Jugaad, which means low cost innovative solution. So you can see that she's using a cloth hanger and she's using some pieces of cloth to kind of tie her mobile phone so she can get the right view, to right view of the blackboard, which she can then relate to the kids who are taking the online class. So there is like, it's kind of, it also kind of talks about the huge opportunity in terms of revenue, and that's where designing for the next billion users is very, very important, because be it online shopping, online entertainment, or leisure, basically the next billion users are taking over the internet. So again, if you look at some of the statistics in India, the e-commerce market is projected to touch about $84 billion in 2021. And again this year, due to the pandemic, online shopping has significantly risen in a country like India, and many Indians are also being forced to use a lot of online transactions because of the pandemic. While all this was a very rosy picture, we saw that there's a huge increase of the number of users. There is a huge potential for the revenue, or huge potential to kind of tap this market. But this, designing for countries like India is also very, very challenging. And that's because a country like India is very complex. India has many cultures within the country, and that's because we have various ethnic groups. And similar to India, there are also other countries in Asia, or probably even in Latin America, where there are a lot of ethnic groups, and it's pretty heterogeneous. When you compare to some of the the countries where the first billion users lived, like the US or UK, and every region in India has its own cultural identity in terms of there are numerous languages, there are numerous festivals, there are numerous religions, or even numerous races. There are like about 22 official languages in India, and each language kind of has a very different dialect. And added to this, many Indians also cannot read or they cannot write English, uh, especially because most of the manuals for the products come in English. But many Indians cannot read or write English, and also there is no single language which kind of binds all Indians. There is Hindi, which is kind of widely spoken in India, but again there are not many languages. There is not a single language which kind of binds everyone. Um, and apart from languages, there is also a huge variation in terms of income. So if you look at this chart, the upper class Indians, they kind of they're somewhere comparable to the middle class in the US or in Canada. They pretty much earn as the middle class over there. But if you look at the lower classes, they're some of the very poorest in the world. And this kind of variation in the income levels it kind of also defines your purchasing power, or even your access to certain information. That's because many of even though data plans, the mobile internet data plans are becoming cheaper day by day, but it doesn't mean that all Indians are able to afford that. So it's still kind of inaccessible to the lower classes. And according to one of the recent study by UNICEF, it also mentioned that a lot of poor kids, they're unable to, they're unable to get education online, because they are not able to access the internet. And apart from that, it's not just uh, um, data being expensive, but it's also about issues with connectivity. So a lot of India and many other Asian countries kind of face huge connectivity issues. So as you can see in this image, there's this girl who is kind of sitting on top of the roof of her house because she doesn't get good internet inside her house. So she has to actually climb the roof and kind of take her online classes. Yeah, so connectivity is a huge problem for many Indians. So now, it's also about, so when you design for, such a diverse group who speak different languages, who kind of have different social or different cultural backgrounds, or who come from different income levels. So it's also about then thinking about how do we ensure that we include or we design for something which includes such a huge diversity. So let's see, how do we do that? How do we design for this huge diversity? Um, so typically, when we start to design, we begin with research, and we kind of uh, start to look at, how do we kind of include, our research is kind of targeted more towards covering the functional needs. But it's also very, very important that you look at the emotional needs of the users, in terms of their behavior, or in terms of the motivation, and then when you combine both the functional side or the emotional side, then you get the bigger picture, and you're able to kind of cover a much larger area. And also, when you hear the word inclusive design, typically what first comes to your mind is designing for someone who is not physically able-bodied. So many designers kind of limit the word inclusive design to kind of just including designing for someone who is not physically able-bodied. But is that what inclusive design is all about? Not at all, because inclusive design, or rather the word inclusion, means that you get rid of any sort of discrimination. So it's kind of looking beyond, just beyond including not just the physically differently abled users, but also to kind of cover different races or different genders, also in terms of the social, cultural, economic factors, or different intellectual capabilities as well. So basically, inclusion means getting rid of any sort of discrimination. And inclusive design is kind of planning, is to make sure that a product or a service can work in, to as many users as possible, or rather to the greatest use extent possible, because we know that we will not be able to cover everyone in the population, but the word inclusive design means try to cover them as much as possible. So how do we do that? I mean, how do we then design for covering such a huge variety of users? So typically, again, let me just kind of talk a little bit about the design process, right? Or how do we do start from research, and then how does the research kind of translates to our design? So often when we start our research, we plan our research to kind of look at target users. So we go to the field, we do a lot of research, we come back, we kind of get this, we kind of get a lot of data, then we kind of start clustering this data, and we start to, identify certain patterns. We also start to look at themes, and from those patterns, we derive insights. And then we kind of start to look at focus areas, and then we start to define personas. So personas kind of work, it may work, but what personas kind of, where personas may fail is that, they do not really cover the vast majority, the vast majority of the population. um, so maybe then, and you can also look at data then, if personas are not covering a lot, a bigger population, then you can also look at data. But again, with data, it may not be very accurate. And this is a great example. So this, I'm sure a lot of Indians in this talk would be familiar with this image. So a few years ago in Google, when somebody searched for North Indian spices, it showed accurate images. But when they searched for South Indian spices, it showed images of women. And that's because, images were actually tagged in that way. So that kind of pretty much says that data is not very reliable. Data could even be promoting bias. So it's not really good to, to really go with data derived, doing data derived design, right? You just use data as to inform you, but you don't really rely on data. So what could then work? Um, so maybe, you do few things differently. So when you come back from research, you ensure that you're covering a majority of patterns which is arising from the research. And you could also think about, instead of creating those focus areas or creating personas, maybe you think of creating archetypes. Or you could also think about doing co-creation workshops where you kind of involve the community, or you kind of involve the users in your process, so that, they not only feel included, but they are also, they are also giving you direct feedback as well. So archetypes work better when you have to cover a large group, because when you look at archetypes, unlike personas, which is very targeted at, defining. When you create a persona, you base it on basically on demographic information. But unlike personas, archetype kind of look at the wider population. They kind of focus on attitudes or behavior or motivation or even pain points. And typically, archetypes are also gender or ethnicity neutral, while personas kind of look at who. Archetypes kind of go further. They kind of describe who does what, why do they do it, and when do they do it. And because they are including the most important question, why would somebody do it, that kind of, that kind of leads your design, and it kind of helps cover a much broader area, especially in terms of understanding their motivations or understanding the behavioral pattern. Archetypes work very well when you have to cover a much wider population. And so, how do you go about then defining archetypes? It also begins with, how do you recruit participants? So make sure that, when you recruit participants for your research, you're doing it not just based on their age or on their income levels, but you're also kind of recruiting them based on their attitudes towards certain product, and this could be based on some of the assumptions you already have. So, for example, at Frog, when we were designing a health app, we recruited users based on their attitude towards health. So we not only we look at different, including different age groups and income levels, but we looked at, their attitude towards whether they really care about their health, or whether they do not, they are either unaware or they don't really care about their health. So what this does is, it becomes more inclusive, because you're going beyond demographic information, or you're going beyond gender or age. You're trying to understand, how do they take care of the health, or why do they think, it's not, health is not so important, and then how do you design for that? Um, and another thing is, you might want to also look at is covering extreme users. So extreme users kind of represent a small portion of the total number of users. But however, when you compare them to an average user, they have a much greater or a much lesser need in terms of the problems they face. So what happens is when you design for these extreme users, you automatically cover, the average users. So just to give you an example, in India or many Asian countries, network coverage is a huge issue. So let's say you're designing for an online education app or a portal. If you look at the kids who have to take classes from either sitting at the side of the road like these kids in Indonesia, or they have to climb the roof of their house to take the online classes, then you're kind of automatically covering the kids who are sitting inside their room and they have good internet access inside their house, and they also have less distractions. Or you could even look at some of the other extreme scenario where the children have absolutely no access to internet, and that means you have to base your design on reaching to them via the TV or radio, right? So what this does is then you will base your design for designing for not just the connected moments, but also for those disconnected moments. And you ensure that you're basing your design for low internet speeds. So basically, this kind of helps drive your by kind of covering this extreme scenario. You're also covering the average or the normal scenario. And another scenario in the Indian context is, should you design for the community or should you design for the individual? So most of the Indians, they kind of rely on the community for information. And that's because either they are semi-literate or they do not have access to information. So community plays a huge role in how you share information. So basically, again, this is another, an extreme scenario which you would kind of look at. Or you could even look at how do you design for, how do you design when your mobile phone is not a private device, but it's a shared device. So many Indians kind of live in joint families where there are a lot of family members, and they tend to share phones between different family members. So then you have to think about how do you keep information personal in a shared device. Or if there are like 2 or 3 kids in the house and they need to take online classes, then how do you design for that scenario where the mobile is shared, and then maybe there needs to be like a particular slot for each kid, and so you think of these extreme scenarios. Or how do you make sure that you design for users who do not really understand technical details, and maybe then you will think about designing, if you have to share certain technical details when they're purchasing a product, maybe you tell them, you start by asking them what is the family size for which they need, for which they would need to buy an appropriate washing machine. And that would probably help them decide, right? Or how do you design, so that you design for the regional language, which means that typically when you translate over using some of these machine translating tools, then it kind of gives you the output in a very classical language. It may not be really the everyday spoken language. So basically, then you are thinking of these problems, that how do I design for making it more like a everyday spoken language versus something which is more classical. So basically, ultimately, it's all about how do you frame the problem right, so that then you can ensure that you can create the right solution. So it's all about making sure that you have the framing right. Yeah, and also it's about basically once you have all this knowledge which you gather from the field, It's also about, when you start synthesizing, you also make sure that you rely on some of the existing knowledge which within the group, which means that you have either gained that knowledge over a period of time, or you kind of have that with your own experience. And you kind of, when you start synthesizing everything you got from the field, you kind of add that along with the insight, along with the information you got from the field, and that's how you kind of derive at an insight eventually. Okay. And you might, the other thing, apart from looking at creating archetypes, is you can also think about how do you democratize your entire design process itself. And especially in the current scenario, in the COVID scenario, where it is very difficult to go on the field and do research, you might want to think, how do you democratize the whole research process, where you could have a representative from the community, or you have a user representative who could kind of who could then you kind of upskill that person, teach them some basics about how do you do design research, and then that person kind of does the research for you, and then collects all the information, and then he or she kind of passes on to you. So basically, that also helps, not only in doing remote research, but it also kind of helps in collecting more information, in the sense that you can involve a much larger community who could kind of, who could gather information for you and kind of pass it on, which will help you derive at a solution. And not just in the research process, you can also think about democratizing even the design process. So make sure that you could also do a lot of community workshops, or you do like co-creation workshops, you do a lot of co-creation exercises with the users. And it may be a little difficult doing it remotely, especially if the users are not very tech savvy. There are a lot of tools like Miro or Mural, which kind of allow you to do that remotely as well. Or again, you could also have like a community or a user representative who could kind of go out in the field and kind of run these exercises for you as well. So again, this kind of democratizing your research or your design process kind of helps kind of gather more information, and you're also kind of involving more users in this entire process. um, and the other thing is, this is a very new area, and it's kind of uncharted in many countries. So what you need to do is, you just need to be bold, kind of design your solution, and just be bold, release the product. But what is most important is, once it's released, make sure that you test it, and based on the findings you get, make sure you refine. You keep doing this again and again. So you keep, every time you kind of improve certain features, you make sure you test it again, you refine it, and and just keep repeating the whole process over and over again. So instead of launching it in a big way, maybe launch the MVP, kind of test it out, and then refine it, and then again keep adding features to that. So that kind of really makes sure that you have something out there in the market, you're getting live feedback, you're improvising on the product, and you're kind of and you keep building on top of that. Um, and the other thing is, when once you're done with your research, and you kind of, before you begin your design process, make sure you also define what is called as experience principles, which is derived again from your research. And just to give, because especially when you're designing for the next billion users, which is where there are a lot of unknowns. It's very, very important that where after you do your research, you kind of have these guiding principles which can then flow throughout your design. So just to give you an example, at Frog, since India kind of faces this huge issue with air pollution, So at Frog, we decided to kind of design a solution, which will provide clean air for many Indians. And we kind of went to the field and we did a lot of research. And what we realized is that most of the users, what they said was the air purifiers in the market today, they're pretty expensive and they're pretty unaffordable for most of the Indians. And air pollution is no longer something which can be which can be ignored, and having an air purifier at home is no longer like a luxury item. It's now a necessity for many Indian cities. So when we did this research, we got a lot of feedback from the users, and they mentioned that the solution had to be something which helped them make breathing very easy. Which they wanted something which is natural, which is something which would be proactive, and something which is most importantly which is affordable. So what we did was we kind of kept these four experience principles as our guiding, as that was something which guided us throughout our design process. And then when we designed the solution, we made sure that the solution was not only breathable, it was also natural. So we created like a sustainable smart product, and this because sustainable smart product also helped reduce the price, so it was affordable. And also this product kind of made sure that you don't have to turn it on or turn it off. It can automatically it's there purifying the air in your house 24/7, so it is proactive as well. So basically, these experience principles kind of guided us in helping design the right solution. So basically, when you make sure that when you're designing for the next billion users, you make sure that you do your research, you kind of keep it broad, you make sure that you kind of cover as many users as possible, and then you kind of define archetypes, you kind of define these experience principles, you also make sure that you involve the community as much as possible, and that will ultimately help you define the right solution as well. And I just want to conclude my talk by saying that profit and inclusion need not be mutually exclusive. So by including the maximum number of users or the maximum population, you can actually help grow your business. So so make sure that when you design, you include as many users as possible, and ultimately that will help you bring success to your product, and it will help you grow your business as well. Thank you once again, and please do follow me on social media. That's my LinkedIn ID there. And I also I'm a chapter lead of Ladies That UX Bangalore. So please do follow Ladies That UX Bangalore on Facebook, on Twitter, as well as on LinkedIn. Thank you once again. And if you do have any questions or any feedback on my talk, I would be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Veena. Amazing.
Thank you.
Actually, we have some questions here.
Mm-hmm.
First one from Louisa. Is there any other tool beyond Miro and Mural that you would like to share regarding conducting remote workshops or events in a creative way? Thanks in advance.
Yes, there are many tools. For example, even you could use Zoom, or you could even use WhatsApp, or even like Microsoft Teams to do your research, or to do primarily to do observation research. But Miro and Mural, or at least I'm more familiar with them. It helps you Miro and Mural are more towards if you have to do like co-creation workshops, then they are the best tools. But for research in terms, or if you're synthesizing the research, then Miro or Mural kind of are very helpful. But if you're doing the actual research, then a tool like Zoom or even WhatsApp, especially if you're designing for somebody in the rural areas who may not have Zoom or all these other apps installed. So even what's a simple chat tool like WhatsApp could also be used to do remote research. I hope
Cool.
that answered your question.
Interesting. Um, Another question from Desiree. What differences in doing research have you seen after the pandemic, since we are not seeing each other physically anymore?
Uh, yes, I mean, most of the research which is happening now is remote. Of course, it is a little difficult when you have to conduct research remotely versus when you're doing it in person. But then again, that doesn't mean, it has to stop your process. You need to adapt. With all the remote setup, and you also need to kind of many times also educate the users or the participants on on how they could use some of these remote tools. So again, just to give you an example, many participants may not be familiar with Zoom, so you need to kind of educate them before that you need to install this certain tool called Zoom, and then you have to place your phone, or if they have a laptop, then you keep it in a certain way so that they can see. You could see their their expressions, you could see their face, you could capture their expressions as well as their screen. So there is some education involved, especially for users who are not very tech savvy. But at the same time, it's not that it's impossible to do research remotely. It is very much possible. And the other thing I would say is, like, let's assume, especially, like, if you're designing something where users are totally unfamiliar with using any products like Zoom, then you kind of rely. That's where you rely on the community, in the sense you have certain representatives who can then go out on the field, who can do the research. Maybe they live in the same locality and they could do research for you, and then, or you could do it together, because there are many scenarios where it's not just during the COVID, but you may also not know the local language. So then you kind of have these representatives, and you could do it together. Maybe they have Zoom on, and you can observe what they're doing. And or if they're completely, if they have no network access, or if they have other issues, then you kind of rely on them to do the research for you and then pass it on back for you.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Another question from Teresa. In your view, what are the biggest challenges for women to start working with technology in India?
um, yeah, I think, in terms of the challenges, I feel over the past, the past decade, women have been, they've taken technology pretty strongly. But yes, there are certain, in terms of, like, if you look at certain, if you think about these extreme users or extreme scenarios, which I was talking about in the slide, then there are, like, there are cases where, many times a woman cannot own a phone. Maybe, there's somebody who kind of checks her phone. They see, or especially when it's when she's part of the family, and they're kind of they're sharing the phone. Then there were some issues where, especially the husbands, or the kids, or the fathers are kind of checking their phones, or and you do read these extreme scenarios where, where somebody does not have access to, where the access to technology is limited. But in terms of starting to work with technology in India, I don't think there are any issues. I would say it's the same as any other country, in terms of women entering the area, in the arena. But yes, in terms of, if you look at how do women grow in the organization, or there are still very few female leaders in the technology space as well. And I think that is true to many other countries, not just India. um, so there is overall in the tech industry, there are few women who are in the leadership roles.
Okay. Cool. Another question from Beatriz Gonzalez. Any tips for conducting research in the current situation with users maybe don't have access to internet?
Mhm. Yeah, so when you have users who don't have access to internet, I think the best approach you could do is, or if you're not able to travel to meet them in person in the current scenario, then the best approach is to have like a representative, either from their community, or you could even look at hiring like a local research firm who could do the research for you. Or you could even think of teaching somebody in that community who can kind of upskilling them with few some basic research process, and then that person can do the research remotely, or sorry, not remotely, they can do it in person, or with whatever low tech tools they may have, and then they could come back to you and relay that information to you. So relying on the community would be the ideal way to do it if they do not have access to any technology.
Thank you very much, Veena. As I mentioned before, I really love this talk because I think we can expand our knowledge beyond what we know, like especially for people that maybe are not familiar with the scenario that happens in this case in India. But it's very nice to get to know more. And thank you very much.
Thank you, and thanks once again for having me at Talk UX. And I'm really excited, to also listen to the other talks as well.
Thanks. So we have another talk in 2 hours. Um, from Mary Nolan. She's going to talk about 11 tips for better a moderated user test. So stay tuned. Um, and today and tomorrow we are going to still be hosting amazing women here at Talkwex. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you soon.